From strength to strength, we are now going to be joined by Rob Key, who is the CEO of Converseon AI, and he's going to talk to us about predictive decision intelligence, a new approach to reputation management. And I don't know if any of you have ever heard Rob speak before, but you are in for another big treat. So, Rob, I'll turn the time over to you.
That's a tough entrance. You know, it's funny. I actually feel like a therapy session. It's like, my name is Rob. It's my first AMEC meeting, and I am a dataholic. So, you know, along with the rest of you guys. No, it's great to be here. You know, in many ways, this is my first AMEC, but for many ways, this is a return to the future for me, because back in the day, before I founded Converseon, I was in many of your shoes. I was actually head of the innovation group at Cohn & Wolfe, which back in that day, and also a member of the WPP.com board. And the mission was go out and innovate, but I didn't have a budget and, you know, all the things that happened from that. So what do you do in those circumstances? I went out and started a software company without understanding or being able to write a line of code that has become recognized as really one of the leading AI-powered natural language processing companies in the market. So we've been pretty proud of that. And I've had the opportunity to work with some of the folks in here. I see Giles somewhere over here with Brandwatch and others. And so we've been fortunate along the way to be able to do something I think really powerful. I'm going to show you something today that I've been waiting 14 years to be able to have this conversation. And so we're going to show you some data and some analysis that I think starts to connect the dots between the work that I was trying to do back in the innovation group, back at Cohn & Wolfe, saying we know we're doing something important that's impacting business outcome, but it's like dark energy in the universe. It's there, but we can't see it. Well, we're able to start to connect some dots today, and I'll show you that. So Converseon's mission, we've been doing this since 2008. We were fortunate enough in 2008 to start to work with Dr. Jason Baldridge and Dr. Philip Resnick, two leading academics in the world of natural language processing, to start to apply machine learning to this data. So we did it very early on. Jason now heads up a lot of the NLP work at Google, so we lost him along the way, but the technology continues. And our mission today is to transform this massive, incredible data set that we have, which we call conversation data, so social data, but also other forms of voice of customer data, into what we call predictive decision intelligence. And we do it through applied AI. Applied AI is a different form. A lot of general AI approaches, as many of you know, are kind of overpromise and underdeliver. Applied AI keeps humans in a loop, uses subject matter expertise, et cetera, et cetera. In addition to this, though, I will say, I'm talking about our predictive analytics solution for reputation right now, but Converseon also has a powerful NLP platform. And we were actually recently selected by Twitter as their first recommended solution to be able to provide more intelligent data feeds out of the Twitter fire hose. Because the idea being that those of you who are trying to deal with the big Twitter fire hose, it's very challenging. But if you could pick an airline model specifically for trust, for example, you could probably digest that a little bit better. So anyhow, we have the booth. If you're interested in either of those, please do. But we're turning all of this technology to reputation. So I've been out in the wild after leaving the public relations world, doing brand tracking and product innovation and a lot of things for companies like IBM and Walmart and others. But now we've turned all this technology back into reputation. And you know, I think for all of us, there's been a ton of talk about reputation, that ultimately what we're trying to do as a group, we're creating metrics and visibility and other things to hopefully improve the reputation at the end of the day. But I think in many cases, reputation still has been this kind of intangible asset that's difficult to define. Like, what is it exactly, right? And the truism is, you can't measure, you can't manage what you can't measure, and you certainly can't measure what you can't define. So we want to bring some lessen the ambiguity around this reputation measurement and see if we can actually tie these measures to true business outcomes. And if we can, then we can actually make a better case for what we're doing on a day-to-day basis truly impacts the things that the C-suite cares about, which at the end of the day is revenue, shareholder value, cutting costs, and those ultimate outputs. And the challenge is significant, right? Because, so you guys live this. You know, the world, navigating through this very polarized world is extremely difficult. You make a decision on a political issue or not making a decision. You try not to make a decision, but you're still making a decision. You're being forced into it. And the challenge really today is that we used to go back in the early days, there wasn't enough data around this concept of reputation, but now there is too much data. And the problem is a lot of the data is erroneous. So how do you reduce this massive data sets and these analytics that the C-suite and others are trying to digest and get to the data that really matters? So this is kind of where decision intelligence comes from. We're going to start to talk about data that truly impacts business performance, and the rest of it is kind of noise. Interesting, but kind of noise. The issue with a lot of the reputation measurements that you've seen out there, and some of you may be familiar with some survey-based reputation type trackers and other things too, which are useful, and they kind of have frameworks, and the framework is leadership and enterprise and social and governance and all these other things, right? And they do survey-based approaches, and they kind of dipstick once a year, and you kind of rate me in terms of innovation on a 1 to 5 scale, et cetera, et cetera. Useful. But the problem with those, what we found with the clients that we work with, is that, first of all, the speed to insight is too slow. You can't do a dipstick once a year and take action on it. The second piece is you get caught by these black swans. If you're doing a survey, whatever falls off that survey, you're blind to. And a lot of the reputation challenges are actually coming from the left field. And then there's the issues in terms of actionability. And obviously, the other problem has been tying these reputation measures to really business outcome. So really trying to take the C-suite, taking this seriously, making investments, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a true statement. I'm like, what if, hypothetically, we could say to our client, or if you're internal, our sentiment analysis, or our favorability has increased 10% this month. To this statement, which is true, if McDonald's were to invest more heavily into improving its perceptions in environmental, through communications and policies, it will generate $140 million of incremental revenue a quarter. I mean, it's a pretty powerful statement. And I'm going to show you with data how we can support this. So for all of you here, would that change the conversation? Because ultimately, what my mission is here, and somebody asked me, why are you here? Because I would like to empower this community with the data that's going to get you through the door to the C-suite and sit at the boardroom table and be able to have a conversation that talks about the things that they actually care about at the end of the day. And we can connect the dots, and I'm going to show you how. So the first thing I'm going to talk to you is that this is an evolution out of social listening and intelligence. For those of you, lots of interesting companies here. Social listening, in many ways, has been around since 2006, 2005. Some of you may remember Radian 6, and et cetera, et cetera. And basically, putting keywords into a platform and seeing what pops up. We see social intelligence as the next form of that. That's still a significant part of the industry, where you have humans taking a look at the data, making some sense of what's going on, finding patterns, reporting back on what's going on. The next stage is consumer intelligence, where you're starting to apply frameworks of how consumers see the world. So for brand tracking, it's what are the attributes within a particular category and how do they see things? And maybe you tie that a little bit with some first-party data, which we see, which is the next stage, which we are most excited about and which we've built our whole company around, which is decision intelligence. And decision intelligence is now starting to not just predict the future, but also not only are we predicting the future with decision intelligence, we're actually looking to be able to predict the value of a specific action before you take action on it. So we're not just predicting impressions or likes or pass-alongs or any of that. We're talking about business outcomes across a determinant, which is sales, loyalty, and shareholder value, and empowering this team and others to understand if they were to turn the nozzle on this, the throttle on some of these things, what impact would that have on those determinants? So to get there, and I don't want to get too geeky on this, we could, if some of you are interested in this, the data coming out of the raw social data flowing through the systems and also mainstream media data flowing through the systems isn't in the place that you can do predictive modeling on this data. You have to do things to the data to get it from here to there. So the process for us is you're taking the raw social conversation data, very messy, et cetera, et cetera. And we have a Converseon AI platform. We can show it to you if you're here. It's a middleware product where you can simply, we have clients and platforms. We power different platforms. Clients use it, build their own NLP models. It's a no-code platform, so you don't have to be technical really to use it. But it processes this data, so when it comes out the other end, we can do decision intelligence. So first step is you have to have frameworks. This is the categories of the ways that people look at things as consumer psychology, et cetera, et cetera. The data then goes through a bunch of pre-built natural language processing models. So what's interesting about this is language differs by industry and category, right? So the word small is good for smartphones, but bad for hotel rooms. So when you're building sentiment models or trust models or et cetera, they have to be adjusted by industry to get to that nuance. So we've pre-built hundreds of machine learning models, which you'll see, that help power this platform. So you can pre-classify all of this data coming in into these different segments that you have to be able to measure. Then there's custom NLP. So clients will say, okay, you have all your classifications for environment, social, governance, trust, advocacy, whatever you want to measure. But we have special attributes. We have a big car sharing company who they have a people first attribute. So how do you define that? You have to build a custom model for that. So anyhow, you do all that classification. But then we do something clever. And this has come out of years of working with this data, where we convert the data into something called a consumer memory metric. So basically, this takes multiple different inputs. It applies a layer of consumer memory, because when somebody tweets or says something one day, the next day it doesn't change. It degrades over time, right? So consumer memory has to be built into a metric so that it transforms it into a negative to 100 to positive 100 statistically significant score. At that point, it can go into predictive models. And by doing that conversion into consumer memory, it actually reduces the errors in the terms of the predictive modeling by about 60%. Then it goes into predictive models. And what's critical here is we're reducing those metrics that are only to, now we're taking all this wide range of metrics and now isolating the data that matters to those metrics that are actually contributing to business outcome, so the company can focus its energies on those things that matter. And then we're putting it into dashboards. This is all empowered by APIs. This dashboard's out there, and you can show it. We have all the QSR data. So how do we apply this to reputation? We do start to have all these pre-trained models across ESG, trust, customer experience, which is both functional and emotional, and then we have these custom attributes. You also can, with machine learning, be able to start to classify the speakers, so the stakeholder voices. Are they a customer, employee, investor, or community? We do it through machine learning because a lot of people within their profile aren't going to tell you exactly who they are. It's the way they speak that matters. What's really critical for this, by the way, is one of the first models that the data goes through is a voice of customer model, so that it cleans the data coming from Twitter and these, et cetera, to actual human voices. And within some categories, only about 20 to 30% of the conversations in a particular category are human. The rest of them are bots and everything else. So I don't know how everybody feels about Elon, but there is a certain point that he has around getting to real human voices here. But that's essential if you're going to start to model this particular data. So then you have an aggregate reputation score. It brings it together to a score, and then you can start to break it down into its different dimensions. So you have, think your reputation, then you look at your ESG score, environment, social, governance, et cetera. And within each of those, they have sub-attributes. So this animal rights, community efforts, et cetera, et cetera. So you're looking at each one of these represents a classification, a data classification. So you can see hundreds of models that are kind of built to be able to do this level of classification. The other thing that you have to do is topic discovery. And the mistake sometimes that we all make is bring our own bias to setting up queries specifically for this data. One of the challenges is that when you're using Boolean queries and other things as well, you're predetermining the data that you're going to see. The second problem is most of the conversation is implicit. So when you're trying to build a trust model, for example, very few people say, I trust a brand. They'll say, I use the product with my baby at night because my baby sleeps better. You know it as a human to be an expression of trust, but try to build a Boolean query to get to that. You simply can't do it. So you need to have machine learning models that can capture nuanced implicit meanings within the data set so you can get to enough data to be able to do this modeling. And once you do all that classification, by the way, there's data left over. So, I showed you a reputation score. You like 40% of the data left over. What is this data? You use topic discovery, and there's technologies. There's open source technologies called LDA, and there's more sophisticated technologies. So you put the data into the data set, and it tells you what the discussions are, what the concepts are, et cetera, from the bottom up. So you eliminate blind spots in the data set. And you also, when you're building models, making sure that you're building models that are comprehensive, et cetera. In brand tracking, for example, they'll use this, like, Take skincare. You put all the data in for skincare. You have your attributes that you're measuring for, and guess what? There's attributes within the conversation that are off your radar, so you can adjust your brand trackers. Same thing here. You can have blind spots. The other part that we do is now, this is kind of, again, back to the consumer memory metric. The blue line is real data coming from social listening, up and down, and sentiment all over the place. What do you possibly do with this, right? So you can see how the consumer memory metric smooths it. It's the orange line, only to events that are statistically significant, so you can actually start to make sense of this data. So the other critical thing is, far too often, the data performance that we're coming out of anywhere, you're blind. There's been a lot of talk here about AI bias, transparency of models, et cetera. What I recommend is that every provider of machine learning models also can provide a performance score of its model, so you know precisely how well it's working when it's in the wild. So in this particular case, to make the models work, we need to get to about a 0.80 F1 score. That means precision and recall in the data set, then you can start to model the data. So now we can do some interesting things. We can assess the reputation. Here, we've taken all this data, put it into this conversion scores, -100 to +100. You can assess specifically how you score against your competitors, against an industry average. You can go back 5 years in time, et cetera. So this is your scorecards. So that's interesting. Now it gets more interesting. We get into diagnose. So what we can do here is all of these, if you can see at the bottom, and it's hard to see, all of those sub-attributes under the ESG are there. And to the right, there's like labor relations, diversity and inclusion, et cetera. To the left, it's environment. And you can see the brands on the left-hand side. That's McDonald's at the bottom, by the way. And I don't mean to pick on McDonald's today, but there's interesting discoveries here. So if you as a communications professional look at this heat map, what does it tell you? Go to the lower right-hand corner. We have a problem, folks, like sirens. We need to deal with this diversity and inclusion. We need to deal with wokeness. We need to deal with labor relations, et cetera. We're bleeding, right? And maybe you do. But when you filter this through the prism of which of these attributes and models are contributing to business outcome, it's telling you a slightly different story. And this is what we do here. So basically, we've now taken 5 years of historical data and we've run these models historically to see which of these attributes and sub-attributes are contributing to business outcomes. The orange is actually the model, and the gray line is the actual real revenue by quarter. So you can actually see how well that the model actually predicts revenue. And in some cases, obviously, it's not perfect, but in the world of AI and machine learning, we're not looking for perfection, we're looking for usefulness. And if you see it does a pretty good job of predicting revenue. In this particular case, you can then move, there's a simulator, so if you move reputation environment all the way to the right, you're going to see that its prediction on revenue is going to show you that it will generate approximately $140 million a quarter, which actually prioritizes it over the diversity and other issues that are certainly important because they generate $110 million per quarter. And you can start to make judgments in terms of where you put your energies and where you put your focus and where you build campaigns and where you change policies. And it can let you get even very granular. So for example, as it says here, even on the far right, on those where you're bleeding red, we now know that employee wellness practices contribute to revenue, but gender equality, it contributes to revenue 15 times more than wellness. We now have the ability to be able to make decisions, focus energies, program, and understand how these reputation measures now, in a very granular level, contribute to specific business outcomes so that organizations can invest into reputation and hopefully empower the communications teams and others to take this data and also triage it to other parts of the organization, right? Because this data also touches your sustainability person, your CX person, et cetera. Can we as an industry be stewards of this data to drive transformation in the organization? And I guess that's a question I have for this conference as well. Are we ready to step up to that level to really become true stewards of reputation and having the data to prove that our investments on a daily basis are driving the outcomes? So it's just that in conclusion. We've now at the point where you might have a lot of data science questions and modeling questions, and we can go through that. A lot of this stuff is peer reviewed, so this stuff works, but there's a lot of technology that sits behind this, obviously. But we now made reputation from an intangible asset to a tangible asset. We're now able to reduce the noise from all this data that's coming through and all the analytics that's coming from many different channels to just the analytics and metrics that matter, so that we can get to decisioning. We can now prioritize actions that we can take against these different attributes, so we know where to put our money and our limited resources. So not just chase, for example, something that looks negative, because that may not be impacting your business at all. I didn't do it here, but if you look at governance and you moved it all the way to the right, we made a big investment in governance, had no impact on revenue. So you should do it maybe because it's the right thing, but at the same time, in terms of limited priorities and budgets, where do you put your budget, right? We're also empowering, in this world of navigation, navigating through this kind of uncertain future, being able to have tools to be able to simulate different actions to navigate through this, I think is essential, right? We say sometimes in the world of real time, in this world we live in today, real time isn't always fast enough. That's the truth. We need to be able to see into the future and not just what's happening right now. And if you're using social media and media analysis, those are starting points. Those are great. This is a complement and to build onto those solutions. And I do hope the industry, 14 years removed from me, is prepared to kind of step up and own. If we truly want to be the stewards of reputation, I hope these are the tools that we can start to use to get into the C-suite and have the types of conversations we need to have to really affect change and impact the reputation in our organizations. And that's what I have. So thank you guys very much.
As promised, great insight, great outlook on things. Why don't you have a seat for a couple of questions, Rob?
Therapy chair.
Yeah, you asked for therapy, went on walkabouts. I feel like this is the right way to close everything. Yeah. I think you've given a different context to it, given everyone joining us that different way of thinking about reputation, right? So it isn't just these KPIs, but it's looking at it holistically. You talk about that your system is peer reviewed. What is that process like? I know that there are some partners in the room who are, looking at that validation, not just beyond the customer point of view. What does that look like?
Yeah, there's lots of steps. There's lots of validation within the process. If we're talking about the core NLP models, the platform spits out across holdout sets, specifically how well those models are performing against data that it's never seen before. And that's really the critical thing. You can make any of these models look good if you train to the tests, but what we're really doing is looking at the models both at the NLP level and the other classification level, and also the revenue prediction models. That we're backcasting those models and showing it data that it hasn't seen before to see how well it predicts against that. And it's all obvious and reported. So they say the past is a precursor to the future. The more we can understand the past, the better we can predict the future. And the great thing about the social media data is we can go back in time to help predict. Now, things like COVID will happen, but interestingly, we have one of the big airlines as a client, and these models did help predict the type of revenue decrease in advance before it showed up on their balance sheet. So even the models are continually being fed data so that they're always improving and kind of adjusting based on what the new data says. So even in those circumstances where those black swans, at least gives us some directional insight into where things are going. And anybody who's really interested in this, we'd be happy to talk to you more about the modeling exercises, et cetera, associated with it. My head of data science isn't here, but I can pretend as best I can to go through those.
He gets therapy and to play dress up. This is just everything's coming up, Rob.
Exactly.
We have time for one question from the audience. Great. Meg? Meg's hand was first. Yep. Thank you, Stefan.
Microphone. That was super interesting. I really enjoyed hearing your presentation. The book, have you read the book, Everyone Lies? What is his name? Steven Stavitowitz, about the concept of people lying in social media conversations, or not telling the truth, not, saying you, like in America, it's like you don't want to get vaccinated because you don't want your right-wing friends to think you're a wimp, but, secretly sneaking out for a vaccination. Like, how does that impact the data and the conversations that you're collecting?
I think it's a good point, because I think when you get to that, if you think about the maturity framework, when you were in the social research or social intelligence and consumer research, a lot of questions you would get is this data representative, or or exactly those types of things going on where people are saying something but doing something else. The ability to be able to tie those models to outcomes, though, kind of cuts right through those arguments, because we say if the data is predictive, then by definition, it's meaningful. And so we're able to kind of address some of those issues. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important to connect these points together. Yeah.
And to have all of those data points, right? So that it kind of creates that false positive. I was laughing, Meg. It's like we're recovering from a society where you have to go out in the cover of darkness to get your covert booster. I just feel like that's probably a whole other reason for mental health awareness, but
Right.
So we digress. I'll ask you this. Where do you see things going? I know that you would like to see us on this path of looking at reputation in a different way. What's the probability that you see a conversion of 50% or more of the audience to adopt that path in the next 18 to 24 months?
Well, you know what? I'm always an optimist, which is why I guess I spent 14 years trying to do this, and make it work. What I find is the clients that we work with directly, which includes the Walmarts and others of the world, are heavily embracing this. When I talk to agencies, I've gotten mixed reaction. I had some folks who I really think highly of say, we're too campaign oriented to do this. We're just, we're on and off, and that's kind of where we are, and maybe our internal folks aren't the right people, and but I think we as an industry should be aspirational. If can that be changed? If we're able to show this data, and can we, get the traction internally to be able to have a seat at the table? I hope so. I think the jury's out. If not, by the way, Accenture, Deloitte, McKinsey, and everyone, they're going to do this, certainly. And but I think the communications industry has a great ability to step it up. And time will tell. You tell me, everybody. I'd be curious how many of you think this data would be helpful and would it open doors for you? And I don't know, show of hands, I don't know. Yeah, a few people. All right, that's great. And some of you may think that this isn't in our remit, is this industry. I don't know how many people think that. This is kind of peripheral to what we do. I got into this industry because I wanted to have an impact and make better products and be better corporate citizens. And, in every circumstance I think about, and we work with some clients who are reputationally challenged, this data has helped them become better organizations. So we can changing from the inside out is very powerful. And I think that agencies here and the media companies here have a role to play.
Agreed. And optimism is always welcome here, and we will put some action behind that to see that we can help the community advance and the professional, giving them kind of that eyes open moment to see that everything is in their periphery if it's about reputation. Right. So, Rob, thank you so much. What a great presentation.
Thanks, everybody.